Hello everyone. Have you ever been scammed? Well, if you have, then you know it sucks. But the people behind these scams often have their own very interesting tales, so I thought we could have a look at a few famous scammers and fraudsters across history. First, we're off to the 15th century to meet a very special French woman. Not that one. No. Well, not exactly. Of course, we all know that Joan of Arc became Joan of Ash, but a lesser known story was of when she lived. Joan died, allegedly, in 1431, and now it's 1434, and look who it is. No, it's not Joan. It's either Jean or Claude de Amoise, an imposter. I say either because it seems she used either name, but I'll call her Claude because it's the cooler of the two. So she announces herself as the real Joan of Arc and meets the real Jonas brothers. I think we can imagine how the meeting went. Don Remy, France, France. They thought it was really her, like the good brothers they were. So the three of them start their own Tour de France, notably showing off in Orléans, where the real Joan did something or other, and got given loads of gifts. Her street cred started to grow, largely because she lived her whole life on the road, as more people began to think she was the real Joan. Like, she met actual nobles, including and not limited to Elizabeth of Luxembourg. Gasp now. She even convinced her would-be husband, Robert de Amoise, who was 20 years her senior. Well, for about 5 years it's all going well, and many thought she was the real Joan. That is, until, in 1440, King Charles VIII wants to see her. Now, he was old enough to have met the real Joan and had talked to her, so this would be a tough one for Claude. So, when they do meet, the king wants to check it's really her, so asks her to tell him the secret that the real Joan had done. So, Joan, can you tell me what you said all those years ago? This exposed her for the imposter she was, and she admitted to a Parisian crowd that she was a liar. Her husband didn't care though, and they remained married and she lived a luxurious life. So, the lesson here is to convince your partner that you're a recently deceased celebrity and to hope that they buy it. Next up is the curious case of one Paulus Hector Mayer, a German lad from the 16th century. He worked as a civil servant in Augsburg, but his true passion was for martial arts and fencing. Like a certain Mr. Comic Book, he loved collecting fencing manuals. After reading a lot of them, he took it upon himself to make the ultimate compendium of all fencing knowledge, so started to make a manual. He got the best painter in town and two of the best fencers to pose, and I'll show you a couple of my favourite pictures from it. There's the proto-chloroform, the pokey pokey, and who could forget the romantic tackle? Now, as you can imagine, the production of such a book all those years ago would have been very expensive, and yeah, it was. Coupled with his tendency to hold expensive parties with the city's bourgeoisie, old Paulus started to go broke. So, what does he do? Why, he embezzles city funds, of course. Anything to create the ultimate book of fencing. Well, Augsburg found out and weren't happy, so they hanged him. But at least the books somewhat survived, and we can now all learn the majestic art of fencing. Finally, we're going to Britain. I mean the USA. I mean Canada. Well, actually, we're going to all three to trace the tale of one Lord Gordon Gordon. His real name remains unknown, as does much of his life, but what we do know about him is that as masquerading as Lord Glencairn, he scammed London jewellers Marshall and Son for £25,000 and promptly left the UK. He reappears in Minnesota and then in New York in 1872, where Gordon comes into his own. So you might have heard of one Jay Gould, mega-rich tycoon from the late 1800s. Well, Gordon certainly had, and approaches him. He says that he has 60,000 shares in the Erie Railway stock, which is kind of a big deal, and Gould quickly forks over a lot of money. Because you can always trust a random Scottish lord, Gordon Gordon, who appears out of nowhere. Well, Gould found out that I was being sarcastic, and had Gordon arrested. Being a great friend, Lord Gordon Gordon ran off to Canada Land and left his buds with a $37,000 bail to pay. After living in Winnipeg for a couple years, some Americans show up and abduct him, carrying him south. Now, the problem is that as much as Americans don't want you to know, there's an international border here, so it's not in their jurisdiction. So, Near the border? What do you have, eh? Moose. Looks about the size of a man. Boys, get him. Of course, in custody, Gordon's web of lies and scams were exposed. Still, he did manage to escape, and had just enough time to kill himself. Oh. So, I think the message of these stories is that it's not worth trying to scam someone because you'll probably get killed for it. Unless, of course, you can imitate a recently deceased war hero. Well then.